Hello and welcome to Army of Crime, the internet's only podcast. On this episode, Matt, you wanted to talk about this comic book that is called Batman. However, and I hope everyone is sitting down for this, the catch is that this Batman comic book was made in a country other than the United States of America, namely the country of Japan. It was written and illustrated by Jiro Kuwata and was created in the mid 60s as part of the so called Batmania craze that was prompted by the popularity of the Adam West starring Batman television show.
Right, right. So yes,
Uh,
my name is Matt. I am also on this show. Yes, I was intrigued by it. I was intrigued by it because it seemed like a little bit of pop culture oddity, and I was intrigued. I was intrigued by Batmanga, as it is sometimes rendered.
yes, DC Comics for the first time released a collection of all of Jiro Kuwata's Batman comic books in English translation under the title of Batmanga.
Yeah, so I thought it might be worth a read. So it's 3 volumes. It's like 900 some pages total. It's quite a few issues collected. It's mostly black and white. It's interesting. It's interesting.
Matt, I guess the question
Yeah.
is this Batman comic book was a shonen manga, which is means it was part of the genre that was primarily tended toward a young male audience, like roughly probably about the same age as a American Batman comic book, right?
Yeah.
So, with that in mind, would you say that this is an exceptional or high quality comic book in its own right, or is its primary value, as you mentioned previously, as a sort of pop culture curio?
That's a very good question. I feel like I want to lean more towards the second choice there. It's kind of an interesting thing. It's kind of an interesting artifact. I did enjoy reading it. I thought it was sort of fun and whimsical. I don't know if I would go around recommending it to everyone necessarily, but I did enjoy reading it. What I thought was kind of fun about it was because it's kind of just like a fresh take on Batman that doesn't really have anything to do with any other Batman stories. It uses almost entirely, minus Clayface for some reason, it uses entirely new characters other than Batman, Robin, Alfred. Like all the villains are completely new. I guess it has Commissioner Gordon in it too.
Well,
But
it should be said as well that, and I believe this is listed in the last, at the end of the third volume, that all of these stories are roughly inspired by American issues of Batman. So
like
the plot,
loosely adapted from,
yeah, very
yeah.
loosely adapted from. And I have not read, I did not do like a comparison, but they seem to be, yeah, pretty loosely adapted.
Yeah. And it just seems kind of a little bit of a fresh air, I guess, from a superhero comic. Obviously, we're looking at this through the lens of this is a DC property, and Batman has all these different stories, and there's continuity, and there's this and there's that, and then the thing that I thought was charming about it was that it doesn't really bother with all that kind of stuff, right? It's kind of like a sci-fi detective, like a science fiction detective, and they have these little adventures. There's like Professor Gorilla, Lord Deathman, which is like a skeleton guy who can will himself to die at any moment. Um, there is stories with like mutants. He goes into a different planet at one point. Like it's just kind of like fun little one-offs um, that are like little self-contained things that kind of just lean into the concept of just like a science fiction detective,
To be
and
fair,
like
uh, that's basically what Batman comic books were like in the 50s and 60s in America as well.
right, right, sure, sure. I just found it kind of charming. I don't know. I thought they were kind of fun. It's it's kind of the thing that the Batman 66 show does, which is kind of a specific atmosphere of just trying to like be fun and just kind of just like throw some stuff at you, and they're not all winners, but like there, like I said, there's Professor Gorilla, there is What are some of the other fun ones? There's the one with the mutants, where they like discover mutant genes in people. People are like changing into mutants. There's kind of a weirdly complex one called The Outsider, where Alfred like switches bodies with someone and then turns into a supervillain who can control objects telepathically. Yeah, there's one called The Man Who Quit Being Human, which is about a guy who turned himself into a mutant. Just kind of like oddball, like fun, like oddball stories, I guess. So yeah, I enjoyed it. I thought it was kind of fun. I thought it was charming and whimsical. I think it captures what people kind of like about the Batman 66 show, was just that it has a lot of energy and it's just kind of like moving forward, and just kind of mixing it up. Does that make sense?
I think so. I get what you're saying. So there were a few stories in here that I enjoyed as well, and some of them less so. The biggest difference I think between this and well, okay, so the biggest difference here is that the art is obviously done in more of like a shonen style and less of what you would expect from an American Batman comic book at this time. Though the supplemental reading in these volumes talks about how this was more detailed than what Jiro Kuwata was doing in some of his other titles. So I think it sounded like he did try to make an effort to adapt to like a more like detailed style, like an American reader might be used to in a Batman comic book. And of course, like you said, it's mostly in black and white with the occasional color page for flourish. But also that these Batman comics have some humor in them, which is, I would say, probably almost completely missing from most American Batman comics or most American superhero comics in general. Like
Yeah.
there's one where they're trying to like rescue this guy, and the guy's daughter is there, and she keeps like punching Robin in the face,
Yeah. Yeah.
like over and over again, and that one got kind of a chuckle out of me. So you get a few kind of, and this is obviously more a trademark of shonen manga with just some kind of like silly slapstick style humor.
Yeah.
So that's probably the biggest difference. I mean, would be the biggest differences between this and American Batman comics. I think my favorite story was the one where most of these are just like there's a weird villain guy who wants to like blow up the world and do evil just because.
Well, usually they're just trying to rob things. It's a lot of people really using their advanced insanity slash goon squad slash whatever to like steal objects, rob jewel stores.
Yes, like rob banks and steal, attack the Gotham Museum to steal the rare thingamajig.
Right. The
But the
the
one that
golden
I kind
plates
of
of
liked
yeah.
was the where there was a villain who, instead of being like one dimensional, was like two dimensional. Was the revenge of let me see, the revenge of Professor Gorilla,
Yeah.
which first of all I thought was cool. Professor Gorilla, and also I would say Lord Deathman also has a really great costume. He's actually wearing like this like Phoebe Bridgers style skeleton jumpsuit thing, but with like a freaky like skull mask kind of thing. That's like maybe not really a mask. Ho ho ho. The other character I thought that had a really cool design was Professor Gorilla. He almost looks kind of like Mass Justice or Hooded Justice from Watchmen.
Yeah.
He's kind of like all black. Let me pull the story up here.
Yeah. I like that one. Yeah, like you said, Lord Deathman is a cool design. I think Grant Morrison put Lord Deathman in part of his Batman series? I believe he did. I believe he managed to stick Lord Deathman in there somewhere. I mean, it's a great name. It's a great name. Great. There's a
Yes,
yeah,
Grant Morrison reused Lord Deathman, though I believe he changed it so that in this the reveal is that like Lord Deathman is actually using like the powers of yoga to like fake his death, whereas I think Grant Morrison actually made him like some kind of immortal supervillain of some
yeah,
sort. What I was going to say about Professor Gorilla, so he is a gorilla who is temporarily given some guy is trying to use a machine to get gorilla strength, but then there's like a switcheroo, and the gorilla gets human intelligence as well. So and then the gorilla seeks to avenge the wrongs done to him and to animal kind in general. And he's got this great outfit where he's got like a full like black mask covering his face with a white cape and white gloves. And of course, because he's a gorilla, he's kind of like bowling ball shaped. But he's actually a pretty cool villain. So yeah, and he's got white boots and like a white belt, like on this like black outline. So it's a great like black and white, character design. He's got these like huge white eyes, and so he would fight. He fights Batman as the strength of a gorilla, the intelligence of like a scientist. But and then it becomes sort of a, like I said, he's trying to like right wrongs done to animal kind, and he has this sympathetic backstory, and he's trying to use this machine to continue to give himself human intelligence so he doesn't like backslide into just being a gorilla. Kind of an interesting and sympathetic villain. So I enjoyed, that was probably my favorite of the stories in here.
Yeah, I did like that one. I liked the Mystery of the Outsider. Is I don't know if you read that one. It's pretty wacky. The wackiness levels start to get almost too high. Where this is the one where Alfred has, through a series of circumstances that I will not try and summarize, Alfred dies, but then turns out to be alive, and then switches bodies. No, he turns into a villain, and someone else turns into Alfred's body. So there's like a body of someone. It's kind of strange. It's a very strange setup, and then the end result. I just liked it because it was so odd. Like it's this thing where Alfred turns into a mutant who can like control things with his mind, I guess, and then he's all scrambled up, and they have to figure out how to put him back. It was just so odd. I just couldn't help but find it charming, I guess. I also like the one where there's a one where Batman fights somebody called the Planet King, and this is, it is a one-dimensional villain, and he's just using devices based on different planets, and each time he shows up he has a different costume, and he looks like, he kind of looks like Silver Age, like Starman. Like he has
Yeah,
a very like comic booky, like I'm a science fiction super villain, or like a Power Rangers character or something, costume, and he has all these like different gadgets that do different things based on like the planets. It just seemed like kind of a fun story, kind of upping the sci-fi level from where we, coming in as a contemporary reader, where we expect Batman stories to be at. Like you said, there was an era of Batman where that would have been normal, but coming in as a contemporary person, we don't always expect to see that much sci-fi inside our Batman, if you see what I'm saying. And I also like the very last story. The very last story involves an intergalactic gladiatorial contest where Batman gets stuck on another planet. He's really drawing off of the think yeah, like that time period of Batman where it was like he could travel to other planets and have like alien adventures and meet aliens and then come back to Earth. So I like that
right.
one too. And Batman helps lead like a revolution against like an alien emperor on
Yes,
another planet.
an alien despot summons all these various people from different planets to fight for his deranged entertainment, and then Batman is one of those people, and they like team up to like lead a revolt against the Emperor. So that, yeah, that one is kind of enjoyable. The Outsider one is interesting. If you look at the cover for that issue that's in color, you can see the Outsider is green and he's wearing red pants, and his skin is like, I don't know, looks like the surface of the moon or something.
Yeah.
And he
There's a lot of
is
moving pieces in that one that I'm not sure where the inspiration comes from.
he is Alfred Pennyworth, who sacrifices himself to save Batman and Robin. And a scientist uses a machine on him, but the machine like does some kind of reversal switcheroo so that the dead person comes back to life. And now instead of loving Batman and Robin, he hates them and wants to kill them.
And he
And
can
then the
control.
scientist is then given Alfred's body, causing a sort of befuddling mystery, until eventually, spoiler alert, Alfred is able to come back to life as his normal self.
Yeah, it has a good opening because he drops off at the Wayne Manor two coffins that have Batman and Robin like mannequins inside, and the outsider's superpower seems to be that he can telepathically control any object that he has previously touched,
Right.
which is, again, it's a weirdly specific superpower. So I got kind of kick out of that. I like the one too where there's a series of robots that they're using to pull crimes, and they're like controlling them from afar. So you have these kind of like cool 1950s era like sci-fi like chunky robots that are doing crimes. They're doing the crimes from afar, like by remote control. I kind of like that one too. I don't know. I just liked it. I thought it's just wholesome fun, Dustin. It's just wholesome fun. There's a bat
I
bazooka,
Yeah, there's
which I think needs to
definitely
come out of the Batcave more often. The bat bazooka. If I was Batman, I would maybe keep that in the Batmobile more often.
there's definitely a few moments like that where you can see a lack of the same sort of editorial control where in an American comic book, they wouldn't let Batman do certain things, and that is probably one of them. And also, like, they're fighting this like Loch Ness monster kind of T-Rex creature that's like living in a bay, and Robin just like pulls out a gun, like a rifle, and starts like shooting it, which is probably not something that Robin would do in an American Batman comic book. I would say that I don't think that these are bad. Like, if someone were, not that I'm an expert on like shonen manga, but like if you wanted to read some shonen manga, I don't know, like Astro Boy, or I'm sure there's plenty of options that would probably be, on the whole, like better than this. I think that this is primarily of interest as, like, when I was reading it, I think the thing that kept me interested was seeing the ways in which it veered from the established Batman mythos, in not only like in his behavior, but in the kind of like villains and the kind of like plots that they get up to, and then the ways that it would, conform to various like Batman interpretations. Like, you see there are panels of him like walking up the side of a wall with like a bat rope, like he does in the 60s show, and he's like driving the 60s car around. So it's kind of fun to see those sort of things. And then, yeah, like you mentioned, like they will pull out guns and start shooting and stuff. And Batman does not seem to have any kind of like the same regard for not for human life that he often shows in the comic book. So I think that like it's enjoyable enough, but I do think that the primary interest is probably just watching the ways in which it veers away from and then back to, the established rules of like an American Batman comic book.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean I think that's fair. It's an interesting point to why these characters last so long because you can do so many things with Batman, right? You can do this, you can do other things, you can do Frank Miller, you can do whatever's coming out now. It's kind of a testament to why people find these characters neat because I guess you can just kind of do anything with them, right? Which is not necessarily unique to Batman, obviously, because you could do a lot of these stories with other types of characters, certainly. But it is kind of a fun testament to that fact, and also just it's kind of an interesting novelty of how many different eras or like time frames of Batman there are because when this was coming out, people, I mean, the intention was to tie into the Batman 66 show with Adam West, which was like the concept of Batman for a time, for a long time, right? Because that was what people had watched it growing up as a kid or whatever. Like it was a big deal culturally, the Adam West
Yeah,
Batman
it
show.
was yeah, like a pop culture behemoth at the
Yeah,
time.
right, and I think it's an interesting testament to the novelty of all the different eras of Batman because you have the Adam West Batman, and there was a time period where Batman was doing a lot of monsters and aliens, right? And then of course you have like the original Batman where he um, is like more take off like the pulp characters, like he's kind of a version of the Shadow or something like that, and then you go all the way through, Denny O'Neil and the blue cape where he's more of like a detective and he has a Ra's al Ghul and stuff like that going all the way up till now. And I think it's interesting just to kind of marvel at how many different things you can fit inside this one character that, if we're being completely honest, is not really all that original as a concept, but you can do so many things with them. And you mentioned the lack of editorial constraint, right? Because kind of anything goes in these stories in a way that doesn't normally apply. It's certainly not today. I feel like they were looser on that in various periods of the past, but certainly today they seem to keep a pretty tight lid on the things you can do in a Batman story.
Like, you can't have just like Robin pull out a rifle and start blasting away.
Yeah, there's a point where somebody dies in Batman in this, and Batman just kind of shrugs. He's like, "Oh well."
Yeah, he's like good riddance or serves them right or something like that.
Yeah,
Whereas now Batman's like obsession with no one dying is almost like a bizarre perversity in his character. And they
and,
also won't always, like nobody ever dies in Batman
yeah.
comic books because, I mean, if they do, they always come back.
Right, right. And here you just get to tell one-offs where you can just finish the story and that's it, and you jump into something else. The only recurring character I think is Clayface, who is also the only character that you would recognize from other contemporary Batman comics or Batman stories. You know
Yeah,
what?
and I know there are several different versions of Clayface. Is this? I think this is like a fairly unique version of Clayface, but I could be wrong. Was this the same version of Clayface that was in American Batman comic books at the time, or did they just make up a new character and call it Clayface?
That's a good question, Dustin, and I'm not sure of the answer. I believe there's actually isn't there two Clayfaces in this story? In these stories, I think there's two Clayfaces. Someone else, I think, takes on the Clayface identity at one point. One
Right.
thing I actually liked about the Clayface stories in this is he turns into just like giant animals, like a giant beetle.
Yeah, he's more of like a shapeshifter.
It's an
Like,
interesting visual to have Batman just fighting like a giant beetle or a giant spider. You know what this kind of reminds me of, even though it's actually not that similar to it, is the Batman animated show. You remember the 90s Batman the animated series, which I felt was just another way of doing like Batman as a concept that is kind of like, and I think what they have in common is it's like Batman, but it's like pared down. So you're kind of just getting like the essential elements. And they're
sure.
like relatively straightforward stories in like a little contained bubble, right?
I mean,
Like,
to be fair, I feel like that's what the majority of Batman comic books have been probably throughout up until like the 1970s.
that's true because the idea that everything has to be editorially consistent and all tie into one never-ending mega story with no one ever dying and everyone coming back, as you're right, is probably a relatively contemporary invention.
Yeah, because I think most of these comic books at the time were all one off stories. But yeah, I don't know that I would have thought of the Batman the Animated Series comparison, but I guess I could see where you're coming from with that. They're both sort of like, I mean, this is almost like a reinterpretation out of, I don't want to say ignorance because that makes it seem like a negative thing, but it's like just using the bare elements of it just because that's like the reference point.
Yeah,
Whereas
like putting a fresh set of eyes on it.
yeah, whereas the animated series was seemed like a much more of like a intentional effort to create a so-called like classic version, like sort of synthesizing all of the good elements from previous interpretations.
Right, right, right.
So I think on the whole, we're probably both in agreement that these volumes of Batmanga are an enjoyable read, if maybe not necessarily like sterling highlights of shonen manga or of Batman, but they are, it's not a bad read, and it is sort of a fascinating popular culture object.
Yeah, yeah, I enjoyed reading it. I'm glad I read it. I thought it was fun. I think it could go in a Batman collection. I don't have much of a Batman collection, I guess. But if I did have an extensive Batman collection or something, I think I would want it in there. I would give it 1.5 thumbs up.
It also tells stories that where the villain can be vanquished by smashing their science machine. I
Yeah,
think
there's a
there's
lot of science machines. There's a lot
several
of
of
science
those.
machines, mad scientists.
Where I guess it's a good, Batman 66. He always had those cool machines like in the Batcave, so I guess it's kind of
Yeah,
fits with that.
I like that their car is nuclear powered. That's never really explained or
Yeah,
um,
well, that's from the show too.
relevant, but yeah, their car is nuclear powered, I guess. Cause sure. I was gonna say we didn't even talk about the Phantom Batman one, where there's like a ghost.
Oh yes, I did read that one. I cannot recall exactly what that ended up being
It's a good
about.
setup. They're going by a haunted house, and then they just see Robin in like the window, and it's like a ghost. It's a fun setup. It's a good setup, and you get a full page spread of them coming up on this haunted house.
Oh yes, I do remember thinking that that was pretty nifty looking. It's kind
Yeah,
of probably an example of the more detailed style that the artist was kind of going for than you would normally see in like a shonen manga, if you will.
yeah, right, 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 right.
Any other thoughts on Batmanga, Matt?
Uh, I just like that Grant Morrison did bring little bits of it back when he was doing Batman Incorporated.
Yeah, I believe he even named the Batman of Japan Jiro after artist of these, the creator of these volumes, the mangaka, if you will.
Yeah.
Well, that has been another episode of your favorite podcast, Army of Crime. Matt, what if the people wanted to find us on the internet or on social media, how would they do that?
So we're at armyofcrime.com is the show site, and then I am on Twitter at Army of Crime. Dustin is at Dustin44444. You can find us on the internet and leave comments or tell us things. You can leave us 5 stars on your podcatcher of choice.
Yeah, put up some stars, whatever.
Yeah,
Life's short. Spread the
yeah.
stars around.
When you get 5-star reviews, they let you over to the podcasting dungeon to see sunlight for a brief period of time.
Yeah,
That's how it works.
they stop beating you with the belt.
Yeah.
Well, as always, stay alive out there.
It's what people do. Podcast people. Podcasters. Casters of pod.
Are you okay right now?